Well, thank you all so much for coming today. We have a very special guest, a good friend of mine, Victoria Cunningham for the Bermuda Foundation for Insurance Studies. If how many guys have ever been to Bermuda? Raise your hand or put it in the chat. I love that. Great. You came on a good day. So you're going to learn so much about Bermuda and also the intertwinedness of the US. And of course, as it relates to reinsurance. So I'm Daniel Perez. I am the program manager here at Spencer. If you've never heard me before, I'm also going to introduce Amisha Katani. So Amisha is also with Spencer, and she's going to help us today with fielding questions. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. Amisha will be tapping our guest on the shoulder when appropriate and asking those questions. Now, we do want participation, and so we have a weekly competition for the best question. We'll get $25 gift card, and Amisha and I we'll ask Victoria for her suggestion as well as who she thinks the best question is, and then we'll tap you on the shoulder and either email it to you or text it to you based on your preference. So make sure to think about those questions because you might get a gift card. And hey, every week you might be the winner every week. I'm not going to tell anyone who to vote for. But alas, if you've never been to Bermuda, I went recently for the first time ever. I got to meet Victoria and some great work that we did together in Puerto Rico and continue to do. We've been in talks about some Bermuda connections, and we do have actually an internship grant that many of you are very well aware of is also open to Bermuda. So we have a lot of connection in Bermuda, but more importantly, Bermuda has a great reinsurance landscape, which we're going to talk about today. So Victoria is going to teach us all about the history of Bermuda and reinsurance. So Victoria, welcome.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to you and the Spencer team for having me. So as Daniel mentioned, I'm Victoria Cunningham. I am the executive director of an organization called BFIS, Bermuda Foundation for Insurance Studies. We were basically set up 30 years ago as a charitable organization with the aim to ensure a continued pipeline of talent into the Bermuda insurance and reinsurance industry. So we do that by funding Bermudian students to go overseas to university. We do that through mentorship. We have an internship program and we do networking events, and then we help with job search. And as for myself, I spent 22 years in the industry. I started out in claims after a big hurricane that hit Bermuda. I then moved into broking and then I moved into underwriting. So I was at a company called Tokyo Millennium Re, which was a Japanese reinsurance company, but we were everywhere except Japan because our parent company was in Japan. Unfortunately, it got bought out by RenRe, which you will see this a theme going on with M&A in Bermuda, but it got bought out by Renaissance Re back in 2019, and I moved over to Allied World. And at Allied World, I basically ran our Bermuda specialty division for reinsurance. So that covered anything from war, terror, political violence, through to event cancellation, through to political risk and trade credit. And then 2 years ago, I decided to take a major career pivot, and here I am today. So one of my favorite things is telling the Bermuda story, encouraging students that this really is a great industry. And, you know, who knows, maybe in a few years' time, you will be working inside the Bermuda market. I'm also Bermudian, so my family goes back generations here. Bermuda, if you don't know, so Bermuda is a 20 square mile island. That map is pretty much where we are, right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We have 60,000 people, and our predominant economic pillar right now is international business. So insurance, reinsurance, banking, accounting, law. So today I'm going to go through a few parts about the history of Bermuda and our international business. We start with the sea. We are an island surrounded by the sea. That picture there is the city of Hamilton, where we say we've got the billions of dollars of capital within 1 square mile. But ultimately, we'll see where we're basically a shipwreck led to us being the global risk capital that we are today. So Bermuda's story basically begins with a shipwreck. So in 1609, the Sea Venture was sailing to Jamestown, Virginia, and it wrecked on the reefs of Bermuda. They were supposed to be heading over to save the colony in Jamestown. And so the English sailors built two new ships out of Bermuda Cedar. There was nothing else on the island at that point. And they sailed on to Jamestown, and they say that they saved the struggling colony to ensure that the permanent settlement actually survived. So the isolation of Bermuda basically has always fostered, and this is a theme of Bermuda, resilience, innovation, self-reliance, and a lot about maritime trade. So between the 1600s and to the 1950s, we were basically a strategic Atlantic outpost. So we had a lot of impact and influence in the wars, but we were also able to build very strong legal and financial systems. And so as we go through the 1800s, we had a very stable government framework. We are a British overseas territory. We had a trusted financial system, and we started getting more local lawyers, accountants, and bankers. And even today, our two large law firms are actually Bermudian owned law firms. So when we look at this era, we basically birthed the international business sector that we have, but a lot of it was because of our strategic Atlantic position. So we were a link between the Europeans and the English to the new worlds of the Americas. So then to start with kind of the birth of insurance, I think AIG was already, American International Group was already on the island, but in the 1960s, ultimately there was a young man called Fred Rice, who was finding it very difficult to buy insurance in the United States. There were a lot of restricted domestic regulations, and a lot of companies in the US then decided to look offshore for those solutions. So in 1962, a man called Fred Rice came to Bermuda with a very radical idea. He was the risk manager of an Ohio steel company, and basically said, well, we're a large company. How can we manage our own risk? Rather than try and get domestic insurance companies to insure it. So Fred worked with Bermudian professionals, and he formed Steel Insurance Company, which ultimately was the world's first modern captive. And so Bermuda became the founders of the revolutionary concept where instead of companies buying traditional reinsurance or traditional insurance, they could then capture their own risk, create their own wholly owned insurance company, and they were domiciled in Bermuda. So we had a stable legal system, we had very flexible regulation, and our proximity to North America made this the best hub for it to be. And so we started to gain that reputation of being a global home of the captive movement, but also one of innovation and, allowing ideas to be scaled and tested. So for those of you that aren't completely aware of a captive, basically you're a company, and instead of buying commercial insurance coverages, you can create your own insurance captive, or you're an insurance company that tailors that coverage to exactly what risks you are facing. So a manufacturing company, for example, might insure its factory, its liability, its supply chain risks. And then they can retain the profits that would otherwise go to the insurance company. They can also access reinsurance markets directly, and they can cover risks that might be too expensive or unavailable in the commercial market. So Bermuda through the 60s and 70s had, a lot of, we were the perfect home. We had a lot of buildup of these captive insurance companies. And over time, we were the leading domicile. We're now top three, I think. We just had the Bermuda Captive Conference in Bermuda this week. But a lot of our captives have been here for over 50 years. So since the 1960s and 70s. So at the moment, this year or today, the captives provide nearly 20.3 billion in gross written premium. So it's a big industry. But by the 1970s, we'd firmly kind of established ourselves as the home of the captives, but our ambition didn't stop. We then went through a period of expansion and experimentation. And ultimately, the Bermuda Triangle people know as places where ships and planes vanish. Well, risk didn't vanish in Bermuda, it evolved, right? So we were able to evolve the captive idea, the captive concepts into multi-owner captives, renter captives. And we were able to leverage that small size that we had because we were then able to be agile. And our regulator was very world renowned and respected. So by the 1970s, we were kind of coming of age. And so looking to capitalize on those advantages. So throughout all this, Bermuda's location obviously created a need and a boom for tourism. We have pink sand beaches. We have the accessibility to the United States and Europe. So wealthy visitors started coming here with steamship travel and then later with flights. And we were quickly became known as the jewel of the Atlantic. Big hotels sprang up, big locations for honeymooners, golfers, cruise passengers. We're basically a fairly temperate climate all year round, although we do have four seasons. But in the summer, it's hot and warm, and in the winter, it's good for sports and things. But ultimately, we once the air travel became more affordable, our mass tourism started to boom. However, we then had major competition when the rest of the Caribbean opened up. So Bermuda is 1,000 miles north of the Caribbean, but because we only have limited amount of land, we were slightly less able to compete on price, and so our tourism products started to pivot to different things, but our economy then pivoted big time to international business. And so that's where we really, in the late eight or the early 80s, started to pivot more into international business. And one thing that happened in the 1980s, again, because there are a lot of parallels between Bermuda and the United States, the US companies were facing major issues with increasing liability premiums. So a lot of that was driven by asbestos related lawsuits, and companies just purely could not purchase cover for love nor money in any of their domestic markets. Court rulings were expanding obligations, and companies that previously had maybe felt that they were fully insured were now facing billions in uncovered exposures. So US insurers started pulling back from these high risk liability lines. And then the multinational, so the big Fortune 500 companies, so that's the largest 500 or Fortune 1,000, the largest 1,000 companies in the United States, they were unable to get insurance. So they were then looking, where am I going to get this coverage? So a lot of them then started to look for alternatives outside of the United States. So much like when Fred Rice came here in 1962 with his steel company issues, these Fortune 500s then started looking out of the United States and they came to Bermuda. So we say when the world ran out of capacity, Bermuda created its own. And that's exactly what happened. So in 1985, a group of Fortune 500 companies formed what we then called ACE, so American Casualty Excess Company, to basically cover the risks that others wouldn't touch. And it was soon followed by XL in 1986. As an aside, ACE actually bought Chubb about 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, and they kept the name Chubb despite ACE being the larger entity. And XL were actually bought by AXA. So XL is now AXA XL. But in Bermuda, the picture is their two big buildings. Bermuda is known for our white roofs on our houses, and a lot of our buildings also have them. That's how we collect our water because we have no fresh water source. Um, but anyway, so these two companies were set up in a matter of weeks. So you had incorporation, licensing, capitalization, all very quickly. And it showed the world what Bermuda could do. We could move fast, we could think creatively, and we could still maintain integrity. And so those two companies, and I don't know how many of you know insurance towers, but back in the 80s, one of the companies would provide $25 million of coverage excess of a deductible of 25 million, and the other would do 50 million excess of a 50 million deductible. So they would sit on top of each other to provide that coverage that these large Fortune 500 companies required in order to continue doing business. And alongside that, one of our most iconic contributions was the Bermuda market form, or simply the Bermuda form. It was developed in the mid 1980s and arose because a lot of the US companies couldn't get those large scale liability exposures, particularly in asbestos, environmental, and mass torts. And it offered something truly innovative. So it had a hybrid trigger mechanism that combined occurrence and claims made coverage. So companies could have more flexible protection and also had arbitration or a robust arbitration framework that's usually conducted in London using English law, but with New York law influences. So basically, any disputes could be resolved efficiently, fairly, and I guess globally with global credibility. So at its core, ultimately, the Bermuda form reflects Bermuda's defining qualities. So we talk about innovation, regulatory foresight, legal foresight, and responsiveness again to the needs of global clients. So the success of Ace and XL, and they were the first two to use this form, signaled a permanent shift. We had now become a center of last resort. And then we were first choice. So companies were now coming to us to see what problems we could solve. So then by the end of the 1980s, we weren't just offshore, we were the center of all global risk. And in the 80s, we signed a US Bermuda tax convention, which gave us legitimacy and clarity for international markets and allowed us to attract even greater numbers of clients and players coming into the industry. So we had new reinsurers arrive, our local talent started to deepen, and our ecosystem broadened. So we had law and audit firms, we had actuarial services, claims services, and we became a fully integrated risk finance platform trusted by worldwide corporations. So even as competition grew outside, because obviously it wasn't just Bermuda that the US was going to or other jurisdictions, we'd learned how to evolve with what was being needed. And so we were leading the way in how things were being done. So then, as the 1990s dawned, there was a bit of a period of shock and change. There were a lot of severe winter storms in Europe. We still had the compounding of the liability and the environmental exposures from the 80s, and capacity dried up and premiums soared. So that's what we call a hard market. And for Bermuda, this was ultimately both a challenge and an opportunity. So our insurance community at that point was about 1,300 companies, mostly captives. But we also were responding with strengthening our regulatory infrastructure and basically going out and promoting Bermuda as being an international, a sophisticated international insurance center. And so we started to see an influx of expatriates, so global workers from around the world coming in to boost our insurance services. So then in 1992, this is where Bermuda really came into its own, where property catastrophe risk started. And it started with Hurricane Andrew in 1992. So Hurricane Andrew caused $25 billion in property claims, which was a record at that time, and caused 13 insurers to fail. It created a massive capacity gap. So now you had US markets who couldn't absorb losses, but Bermuda could. And our response was creating new companies to fill that gap. So within months, Mid-Ocean Re was the first to respond, and then followed by a second wave, including the class of 1993 that we call. So Renaissance Re, still around today, Partner Re, still around today, and Centercat, and they raised 4.8 billion of capital in mere months. So we were fast, we were smart, and it kind of, with new technology, it then allowed us to show our resilience. We also, in this period, started to look at more science-driven underwriting. So looking at statistical models, but including the CAT modeling that included climate change, looked at the ocean and atmospheric cycles. So we used that sophisticated modeling to ultimately better our underwriting results and our support of our clients. By the mid-decade, we were Bermuda was a cat island, so we were the leaders in catastrophe risk. Obviously, we to this day, we see the increasing scale of natural disasters. And we're not just, it's important to note, we are not just North America focused. So a lot of Bermuda companies will write global portfolios. So anything from Asia Pacific, so Japan, New Zealand, we might have Middle East, North Africa, we might have India, We'll have a lot of European, and then we'll have Latin America and the Caribbean. So we're truly a global marketplace. And by 1994, the island was writing over $15 billion in premiums. So there were tens of billions of assets behind these companies, but we were ultimately competing with the traditional centers of London, New York, and elsewhere. And we were also bringing in more reinsurers and capital market players and alternative finance structures. So, because our regulatory model was viewed as credible and efficient, that became a major selling point. So, we were able to enact the Segregated Companies Act, which was a landmark piece of legislation that allowed companies to legally separate accounts. So, didn't just strengthen the traditional insurance, but also enabled non-traditional uses like mutual funds and cat bonds. So this put us ahead of other domiciles and then solidified our role as a global. We then became a global laboratory for risk finance. So, people could have ideas and they could put them through the regulatory standards imposed by our Bermuda Monetary Authority and see where they landed. So now we ended the late 90s with a soft market, but we were looking at underwriting discipline, profitable growth, and basically maintaining our reputation for stability and excellence. So by the time we got into the 2000s, we then saw the 9/11 terror attacks. This obviously, as you're aware, caused unprecedented disruption in the global insurance and reinsurance markets. And suddenly, once again, like we saw in the 80s with the asbestos crisis, insurers and reinsurers faced massive unpredictable losses and capacity vanished overnight. This again became quite an opportunity for Bermuda. We saw companies like Allied World, Arch Capital, basically all come in. Bermuda raised $8.5 billion in capital, again in mere months, because most of these companies were starting to write for January in 2002. But it wasn't just about money. It was about people, trust, infrastructure. The Bermudians are known as very respectful, very polite people. But also, we're an island. We're very laid back. Doing business here is more laid back than, say, being in New York. But we had the experience. We had the experienced Bermudian lawyers, accountants, and our underwriters who worked alongside these new entrants to ultimately ensure that we could start solving the problems and reinsure those global clients while restoring confidence. So, of the class of 2002, I guess it was after 9/11, we saw Allied World come in, who are still going strong. They are now owned by Fairfax, a Canadian company. Arch Capital, very much still in play. Axis. Aspen just been bought by Sompo. Endurance was bought by Sompo. Platinum was bought by Renaissance Re, and Montpellier was bought by Endurance. So a lot of M&A in recent years, but it goes to show that the market is always evolving. And obviously, we still have that expertise that allows us to compete in such testing times. So then by 2005, Bermuda likes to call each catastrophic year, I guess, it comes out with a load of classes. So 2005 saw the hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma, or KRW as we call it, which triggered another massive surge in property cat coming in, capital coming in. Obviously, the US Gulf Coast storms basically tested the capacity of those traditional markets in the United States. But the class of 2005 was more kind of how they deploy capital efficiently and creatively. So we saw Amlin, Ariel, Harbor Point, Lancashire, and Validus. So again, Amlin got bought by Mitsui Sumitomo, one of the largest Japanese insurers. Ariel Re is still going strong. Harbor Point merged with Max Re and is now Markel. Lancashire is still going strong, and Validus was bought 2 or 3 years ago by Renaissance Re. With this, we then saw the innovation of the sidecar structure. So this is another way for investors. So rather than a traditional insurance company insuring things on their balance sheet, this is a way for investors to participate in specific catastrophe risks for a limited period without taking on any other liabilities. But it's basically like the sidecar of a motorbike. So it's a temporary satellite that focuses on a defined set of earthquake, hurricane, whatever risks are defined, and allows capital to flow where it needs to go. And generally speaking, it tended to be where traditional markets were somewhat overwhelmed. But these sidecars laid the groundwork for what we'll talk about shortly, the insurance-linked securities market, by basically connecting catastrophe risk directly to investors in the capital markets. So Bermuda helped create a new tool to manage extreme weather exposures, and then strengthened the market's ability to respond to natural disasters. And it also diversified, I guess, sources of risk capital worldwide. So this was real time, and this is the whole point of insurance, helping businesses, homeowners, communities when they recover from unprecedented storms or events that limit or impact their financial ability to respond. So, we were able to meet gaps in the US market with speed, creativity. And that's why today, ILS continues to be a major feature of the Bermuda market, but it now has evolved into even life, mortality, and even pandemic risks. So all of that came out of kind of some of Bermuda's innovation. By 2008, we also then saw, this is a bit of a doom and gloom presentation, by the way, but it talks about how resilience gets through things. But 2008 saw the global financial crisis, which again tested Bermuda's capital and risk resilience. Banks were under stress. Many insurance markets faced uncertainty, but Bermuda's market was very well capitalized, very diversified, and very professionally managed. So we ended up remaining quite stable. And so we were able to, help our clients around the world and know that they could still place their coverage with confidence. We're now, as I mentioned, writing across the world. And so when a few years later, we saw in 2011, we had the devastating earthquakes, one in Japan, which then had the ensuing tsunami, and one in New Zealand, or two in New Zealand. Again, immense losses coming out of those, about 19 billion plus in cat claims, but Bermuda delivered. Our reinsurers delivered, paying tens of billions in claims, supporting the recovery efforts in those locations, and then continuing to gain market confidence. So three events. So we're not just about, our global reach is not just about the US or Caribbean. Our speed and expertise in coming to market and helping places recover, and then paying the claims reliably in times of crisis. So all of these have strengthened Bermuda's reputation as a safe, professional, and effective risk partner globally. So then going on to speak about ILS. So ILS, insurance-linked securities. It initially focused on property cat risks, so property catastrophe risks like hurricanes and earthquakes. And it has now expanded to include casualty, specialty lines, cyber, and after COVID, even pandemic risks. So again, an example of Bermuda's ability to innovate collectively and continuously, to connect capital with emerging global risks. So how does ILS work? So basically, if you are an investor, you could be anything from a high net worth individual to a large pension fund, but you are looking to diversify your portfolio. And so by going into reinsurance, the likelihood of an earthquake is not likely to correlate with any of the financial economic indicators in the United States. So basically, insurance risk is then securitized into financial or tradable financial instruments such as cat bonds, catastrophe bonds, and investors will receive a premium, and then their principal is returned unless there is whatever the predefined insurance loss occurs. So if a covered event occurs, then that principal is used to pay claims. But ultimately, the returns are driven by insurance events and not traditional market factors. So that is the benefit of the portfolio diversification. ILS is now across every major reinsurance market across North America, Europe, and Asia. And it basically just allows all these pension funds, hedge funds to participate in risk transfer. So, in short, it's a global solution for risk transfer, helping insurers cover losses that might otherwise have been uninsurable, potentially helping to close the protection gap because it's adding additional capital. And so we continue to innovate in this industry. So we'll see where it continues to grow. So while cat or catastrophe risk built Bermuda's global reputation, life insurance and reinsurance has also flourished, and it is now a very important part of our risk ecosystem. We've seen significant growth in recent years in long-term life reinsurers, with a lot coming from North America, Europe, and Asia. So they're giving products like traditional life products, annuities, disability income, critical illness, and health and longevity risk. So again, it's been underpinned and shaped by our regulator, the Bermuda Monetary Authority, and they've basically strengthened the resources dedicated to the life sector. So within the Bermuda Monetary Authority, they have different teams for each different type of classification. And, we're able to give these innovative risk solutions because our regulator understands each of these classes of business. So if we look at how our market has evolved, so we've gone from captives to the big ACE and XL excess casualty. Now we're looking at cat risk, ILS capital, life. This is where we are now. So ABIR is the Association of Bermuda Insurers and Reinsurers. They represent a number of Bermuda insurers and reinsurers, not all of them, but their outputs have said that Bermuda insurers and reinsurers operate in nearly 150 countries around the globe and represents 36% of global reinsurance market. So that's property and casualty by net premiums. And in 2023, Bermuda reinsurers wrote $171 billion in gross premiums with $164 billion in equity. And then 15 of the world's top 50 reinsurers are ABIR members. So if you think about the top reinsurers that a lot of them are the big Europeans, and there's a few big US companies, but 15 of the top 50 are here. And a lot of ours are also in the UK and the United States. But Bermuda isn't really just capital, it's also claims paid. So between 2016 and 2023, Bermuda-based reinsurers paid nearly $1 trillion to help close the world's protection gap. So I don't know if you know what the protection gap is, but the protection gap is basically the difference between the total economic loss and the total insured loss. So for the California wildfires last January, there might have been a total economic loss that included people who didn't have insurance, exposures that maybe weren't covered. There could have been government infrastructure that didn't have coverage. There could have been business interruption losses, so where businesses had to close and maybe they didn't have insurance, so they didn't get money for the profits they could have generated in the time they were closed. But the protection gap would have been the gap between what was insured, so about 50 billion, and whatever that total economic impact loss was. So ultimately, when we're paying claims, we're trying to close that protection gap. And about $209 billion was paid to US policyholders in the 4-year period from 2016 to 2020. A lot of that was in hurricanes and wildfires. 35 billion was also paid to the UK and 29 billion to EU policyholders. And Bermuda is also pays out 60% of hurricane reinsurance in Florida and Texas. So when you consider all of the storms, and I will say, fun fact, last year, 2025, was one of the first year in 10 in a decade that the US did not have a landfalling hurricane. Unfortunately for Jamaica, you will remember they had Hurricane Melissa. But things, when you look at Katrina, Rita, Wilma, and paying to rebuild the Gulf Coast and the Florida coast, this is where Bermuda kind of comes into its own. And even for things like 9/11, so $2.5 billion back in 2001 was paid out after 9/11. And that would have been anything from the property losses from the towers, aviation losses, workers' comp, and again, the business interruption for Lower Manhattan. So just all of this is just a reminder of what Bermuda's reliability in a crisis is. So whenever disaster strikes, Bermuda is generally one of the ones paying. And while it's not just the US, I mean, you can look at headlines around the world now, and something's going to be coming likely to Bermuda. And then it's not just our strength in our balance sheet, right? So I started off talking about innovation and the guys that rebuilt their two boats to go back to the US, to Jamestown, Virginia. We're leading globally in things like catastrophe and climate risk, in cyber, mortgage, and political risk. So all of these are big lines of business that are tested, not maybe not on a daily basis, but definitely, with different things that come out either politically, economically, or in terms of climate change. And we're looking to see what what policy provisions we can put into place, how we can think about these future risks that are going to come down the pipeline and ultimately impact those policyholders, those individual insurance buyers or company buyers in the US and around the world. So we're also seeing diversification into different lines of business like life, credit, new structures like the ILS that I talked about. So we ultimately gone from reinsuring hurricanes, we now securitize earthquakes, and now we can model things like cyber risk and pandemics, and even looking at the climate transition. So we are kind of a laboratory for all things risk. So I talked about our climate modeling and our cat modeling. We also have the new reinsurance structures in things like mortgage and coming out with the cat bonds. So then as we come to an end, the impact is, our reach is obviously global, the way that our claims amounts and whatever goes around the world, the impact of Bermuda is equally important. So in 2023, according again to ABIR, the contribution to our economy was just over 1 billion. It was more than that in 24. And 70% now of our local workforce is Bermudian or permanent resident. So that speaks to the amount of effort that institutions, like BFIS, but we've also got a Bermuda College, has put into training Bermudians, but also those Americans and Brits and Canadians who've come over who have been able to then share their expertise from those international markets. So very proud of our local workforce. And then those companies are putting money back in. So scholarships. This year, there's over 100 internships from ABIR companies alone. So, you guys have the most amazing opportunity to learn while you're still in school. So you can put what you've learned in the classroom into practice in companies. And we also have a lot of training through Bermuda College, which is what I work with Spencer on coming up for. And also, $7.5 million in charitable donations. So a lot of companies will support our youth education and community. But the other thing that international business provides to Bermuda is everything else in the economy. So you have people coming down for meetings, they're staying in hotels, they're taking taxis, they're, going out for dinner in restaurants. So all of these companies, well, whether they're here, whether they're in New York or wherever, they are contributing to the local economy. So a couple of years ago, our Association of Bermuda International Companies came out with international business is everybody's business, because it is everybody's business. So educating people, and this is why I love talking about how the Bermuda story, educating people in the Bermuda story and how, we have evolved becomes so important, because it does hit every piece of the island. So we've talked about innovation, and I've talked about Bermuda being where risk capital and opportunity meet. So we started out with a shipwreck with guys who were on their way to the US. Now we've got global leadership, and we are truly a capital of, we call ourselves the world risk capital. But companies today are carrying that legacy forward. So we are so data driven, analytical, and our expert people can protect communities and economies worldwide. So it has been my absolute pleasure to speak with you guys today. And I am happy to answer any questions, whether they be about Bermuda, whether they be about different lines of business that I might have mentioned. Um, I'm here for you guys. And quite frankly, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And Daniel mentioned that there is a gift card on offer. So let me see what you've got. And maybe also, if you are asking a question, tell me where you're working. Unless you can go in as, don't want any anonymous, you won't get a gift card. Amisha, did you have any questions in the interim? Put you on the spot.
Um, Not really. Oh, someone did raise their hand, so who is
Oh,
that? Sitara. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but you can go ahead and ask your question. Also, feel free to put
No
it in the
worries. Thank you
chat.
for that. Okay. Well, my question is, so I'm curious what Bermuda's like economic landscape is like in terms of, is it more competitive or collaborative among like the insurance companies who are based there? And also, I'm an intern at Santa Clara University in California.
oh, okay. So it's early morning. So competitive or collaborative? So, oh, that's a good question. So I would say it's a mix of both, actually, because obviously you want to you it's a global, you're there to make money, right? As an insurance company. So you need to be competitive. But obviously everyone's got their different appetites on where they're going to participate, on which risks and whatever. But there's also a nature of collaboration. So, for example, I've just been at the Bermuda Captive Forum. There is an ILS conference in October. There's a life conference in September, and there's a risk forum in every March. And these are opportunities for Bermuda companies and overseas to get together and kind of talk about the issues that are facing them. So while we can't necessarily share opinions about, business and doing business, I guess we can speak to opportunities where Bermuda can thrive and grow in the future. So I think companies are still going to be very competitive against each other in terms of looking for the best risks and generating premium. But I think there is a collaborative nature amongst Bermuda companies and Bermudians to ensure that Bermuda maintains its reputation for innovation. So it doesn't 100% answer your question, but hopefully it gives you some flavor.
Yes, that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Aditola?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Adetola. I work with BGO. Um, not much of a question, but clarity. So would you agree that the reason why ILS, yes, the
Yeah,
alternative finance is
yeah.
growing is because of the tax structure in Bermuda, right? Because a lot of people would want to move their funds, to a place where they'll get a higher yield to take advantage of taxes, okay? Um, I would also like your opinion around the profitability structure of companies that are operating in Bermuda. So yes, we see they're resilient, they pay claims when others are struggling, they're able to manage catastrophic issues. But what about the profit, right? How frequent are they able to share profit to their members, or to their company in terms of captives? I think that will be a very nice, knowledge for me. Thank you.
Okay, so when you talk about ILS and the tax structure, so these funds aren't necessarily, I mean, I guess the cat bonds are here, but they're not necessarily a tax play. It's more of a diversification from the rest of the markets. So purely by investing into hurricanes or earthquakes or natural catastrophes or, cyber or pandemics, they are non-correlating to, global tariffs or wars or, anything that could otherwise impact the financial markets. So it's not necessarily a tax structure. There will likely be tax offsets. But to kind of then tie it into your second question, so Bermuda is not a tax haven. Bermuda does have tax, and in actual fact, last year we now have the OECD's corporate income tax. So now companies that have over 750 million euros in profit will be paying 15% global minimum tax. But the profitability of companies, because a lot of times Bermuda's not writing those small value policies. So Bermuda is kind of what's known as low frequency, high severity. So we are insuring and reinsuring things that don't happen very often, but when they do, they're big. So we're not looking at individual homeowners, individual autos, individual, mom and pop shops on Main Street America. We are doing those big Fortune 500, the GlaxoSmithKlines, the big factories, the big airline, fleets that are going to need coverage. So they are coming to us purely because of the benefits we can give from our expertise. And so the companies, many of whom have other global offices, the companies are basically set up here from our regulatory standpoint to be able to utilize our kind of risk framework, if you will. So low frequency, high severity generally tends to be higher premiums. Yes, we'll have higher losses, so we're then not, or higher potential losses, but we're not taxed on our reserves or our investment incomes as much until the advent of corporate income tax, though. So corporate income tax is the potential game changer there, which
I
is
agree.
too soon to tell.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Jason.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jason. I work with Penn State Global Safety. I'm a little different. I don't really understand the insurance risk management as much because we do travel risk management for like education abroad or any students or professors going to conferences and such. So I know travel risk management is also a little different outside of academia, but can you talk a little bit about how travel risk management and this type of risk management kind of come together or can kind of overlap?
Your question is, how does travel risk management and normal insurance overlap?
Yeah.
Okay, so in my mind, and I do not know what travel risk management is, but I assume okay, so we had a university in Bermuda last week traveling down here. So I assume that their school or their professors will have got travel insurance for them in case their flights get delayed, in case they can't come because there's a hurricane, in case they lose their baggage, in case they get sick, right? Those are the kind of things you're talking about.
Yeah, but also I guess like something we do is I guess kind of vet where people are going as well. Like if they're going to Uganda or Kenya, like being aware of the local customs laws, also the current political situation. So I guess is that also stuff you're taking into account when choosing what clients to work with, or
Okay, so you are basically underwriting. So insurance, right? And it doesn't matter what you're insuring. If you're insuring someone's house, someone's car, someone's laptop, a student's travel portfolio, Taylor Swift's global tour, the FIFA World Cup that's about to start, right? You are going to, as the underwriter who works at that insurance company, you are going to be looking at what risks could happen. Well, what could go wrong. So when you talk about where are they going, Uganda, Kenya, right? For the FIFA World Cup, you could be saying, right, the teams are flying together on the same plane, right? If there's something happens to the plane, you've lost the entire, in my case, my biggest fan of England football club, right? Or England football team. So you're asking, how are they traveling? Are they traveling by buses? What are the roads like? What hotel are they all staying in one hotel? Or Taylor Swift, where is she? Where's she going on tour? She was in Brazil and she had to cancel one night because it was too hot. I believe another time in Europe there was the threat of a terror event, right? Is it going to rain and she's outside? Or looking at your house, where is it? Is it within 50 feet of a coastal area? Is it 2-story, 1-story? Is it multifamily, single family? These are all questions that you're going to ask yourself regardless of what you're insuring. So whether you're insuring a house or whether you're insuring American Airlines, right? You still want to understand what it is you're protecting. So these insurance companies in Bermuda just happen to be protecting very big exposures. But one thing I will say, and when I was at Allied World, I used to reinsure insurance companies that insured student travel. So that's how that would get to Bermuda by virtue of you thinking, oh, this is a minute piece of my portfolio, but it's going into an insurance company that is then, because ultimately, if COVID happens again, how many people were traveling when COVID happened, right? It was around spring break. So a lot of people were probably on student travel, or a lot of people were on holiday, full stop. So that then becomes a claim that insurance company can't manage, so it then gets protected up to the reinsurance company. Yeah, but I think underwriting, you could be underwriting state or state cars in your state all the way to the global Amazon warehouses or whatever, but you're still asking the same questions. It's all
Thank
about
you.
underwriting.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Tim.
Hey there, I'm Tim. I'm a student at University of Georgia. And this is a weird question, but I Googled the other large reinsurance markets, and I
Mhm.
noticed that it's Barbados and the Cayman Islands, both ex-British colonies or British territories, I guess. I was wondering, with the new tax structure you just spoke about, is that going to change, or is that going to change Bermuda's place in the market? Like, will other Caribbean islands that have, large English speaking populations, are they going to see an increase in the type of business that Bermuda has done for the last 50 to 60 years or so? Or do you see maybe Bermuda will be more competitive or less competitive? What is your opinion on that? I know that's a weird question. Maybe I didn't word it well, but
No, and it's been asked a lot, and I think everyone has different opinions, but ultimately, well, time will tell. But I think Bermuda has invested 60 years in our reputation, our regulatory framework. We've got the companies here. I don't think CIT, the corporate income tax, I don't think it will be a game changer, because ultimately another function of it is they will need to pay it globally somewhere. So Bermuda's just capturing it for ourselves. If we didn't, it would still be, the United States could take some, or France, or the European countries. Um, and the reason you say so, Barbados and Cayman Islands also would have started out with the British governance, and so that's another reason that is the strength in our regulatory and governance structures, because we all started out from the British fundamentals. But I think the answer is I don't know. Time will tell. I hope not. But I think we're also strategically placed. We're less than 2 hours from New York. Um, so yeah, we shall see. And if you're at UGA, I know your team comes down, your risk management school comes down. So I hopefully look forward to meeting you.
oh, that'd be wonderful. That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much for your answer. Thank you. Thank you.
No worries, Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm at AES, and my question is earlier you mentioned that Bermuda has this very specialized force, and Bermuda's been trying to foster this force. While that does come with many benefits, there's also a very big concentration where if there is a shock or if there is greater competition from within states, that could be potentially detrimental. I wanted to hear your thoughts on maybe the potential, because there is greater stake in that, the potential drawbacks or what Bermuda can do to navigate that.
So hold on, you're talking about if there's a massive kind of loss across multiple areas.
No, what I'm saying is that the workforce is getting developed in Bermuda to
Oh,
be uh, have a competitive advantage in reinsurance and captives. But if the states like Vermont, Tennessee are starting to promote captives to be moved to within the states, how could Bermuda navigate that?
so my answer would be that Bermuda's always been competing with the United States. Vermont, a lot of them, Alberta in Canada's now a captive or growing captive domicile, and the UK is promoting ILS structures. Um, I personally, personally speaking, I think the world is better for more marketplaces to exist. So competition in that sense is a good thing because the more people that can offer these opportunities, the less the protection gap, or the more we can close that protection gap. I think Bermuda is still going to be is still seen as a key leader in a lot of these areas, and I don't think we will lose our relevance. And a lot of that is partly actually because in the United States, insurance is on a state basis. So each state is individually regulated. Obviously, Bermuda is probably, I don't know, 1/50th the size of Rhode Island. But I think um, I I think it's a positive. I think the more people that get on board, obviously, they're competing with Bermuda, but we've still got that regulatory expertise and that reputation. And also, quite frankly, if it's February and you have to go to a board meeting for your captive, would you want to go to Vermont or Bermuda? And sometimes it boils down to that. Um, But Bermuda's a nice place to be, a nice place to do business. You can also see all your companies within. So, a captive owner could be domiciled in Bermuda and meet their reinsurers all in 1 week without having to get on 5 planes. So I think competition in this industry is a good thing. Tim, did you have another one, or are you
No, ma'am, sorry. I haven't taken my hand down. That's my bad. Sorry about
okay?
that.
That's fine. So I'll put a question on you guys and you can put it in the chat. What is the best thing about your internship? And some other top tips for internships is, make sure you ask questions, make sure you speak to different people outside of your teams. Ultimately, they've offered you this opportunity. So take it with both hands. Sometimes you might use the internship to realize what you don't want to do, and that is completely fine. But I think use it to be able to narrow down on what interests you, what kind of worker you are. Are you someone that needs to be told what to do, or are you someone that can self-start and go and find other things to do? Obviously, depends on what kind of work you're doing. All internships are generally quite different. But find out what career paths other people have taken. So, and I've heard that you normally have 2 to 3 careers, if not more, within your lifetime. So don't think that you have to make the right decision once you graduate to be in the perfect job, because it probably doesn't exist.
Hey, I just have a general question for you. I'm
Yeah.
also from the University of Georgia and I'm an intern at Equinix. You mentioned that you've been through a couple different careers within risk management and insurance. Like, what would you say has been your favorite parts of each? And then do you enjoy underwriting the most?
So I graduated from university in England with a geography degree. And I did geography because it was my favorite subject. And my father told me if I didn't know what I wanted to do something I was good at and enjoyed, because I'd have to do it for 3 years. At the time, I didn't realize the extent of the Bermuda international insurance industry. So when I graduated and came home, I actually thought I was going to go to hotel management. Um, but then this massive hurricane hit, right? And so then I was thrust into a local insurance company doing claims. I think a third of the roofs in Bermuda had some sort of damage. So there was it was destruction island wide. But it was a really interesting way to start because I started at the end. So I saw the end of that promise. So an underwriter will make a promise that if something happens, we'll pay you, but the claims people are actually paying it. And I think that gave me a good foundation to get into broking, which while I enjoyed, I think underwriting, you can turn around and say no. So as a broker, you're having to place deals and get the deal done for the client. As an underwriter, you can say this is not within the appetite of my company or whatever. I also was surprised with underwriting, and one of the reasons I liked it so much was it is very social. So you are selling your company, your products, yourself to those clients, and it was rewarding. But I think if I was to do it again, I would probably still do the same. But I think, yeah, underwriting definitely was. And I also like the problem solving element of it. So when you're looking at a risk, or after COVID, when people still want to have pandemic coverage, how can I get this in where my company's told me we're not, we don't want to write more pandemic risk. So you can kind of problem solve. Um, yeah, I'd say figure out what your strengths are and how they best align with the different characteristics needed for each role.
All right, so that is our time for today. Thank you, Victoria, for agreeing to join us for Virtual Campus. It was a great presentation, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for those who have asked questions. I will reach out to you probably next week if you are the one who won the gift card. So stay tuned about that. And we will also have this recording up on YouTube shortly as well if you guys wanted to look back on the presentation. So thank you all for coming, and hopefully we see you again next week.
Thank you guys and good luck.